Impeachable offenses were those that, quote, inflicted grave harm on our political order, end quote. Then Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler noted during the Senate trial, and I quote, "To the framing generation, moreover, abuse of power was a well-understood offense. It took two basic forms. The first occurred when someone exercised power in ways far beyond what the law allowed, or in ways that destroyed checks on their own authority. The second occurred when an official exercised power to obtain an improper personal benefit while ignoring or injuring the national interest," end quote. Chairman Nadler continued speaking of presidents and, by extension, executive branch officials, and I quote, "Let me unpack that idea, starting with the first category, conduct clearly inconsistent with the law, including the law of checks and balances. The generation that rebelled against George III knew what absolute power looked like. It was no abstraction to them. They had a different idea in mind when they organized our government. Most significantly, they placed the president under the law, not above it. That means the president may exercise only the powers vested in him by the Constitution. He must also represent the legal limits on the exercise of those powers. A president who egregiously refuses to follow these restrictions by engaging in wrongful conduct may be subject to impeachment for abuse of power," end quote. That was then Democrat Chairman Jerry Nadler. When it comes to Secretary Mayorkas, we are well beyond that point. This is not about policy differences at all. We certainly object to Secretary Mayorkas' policies, but this goes far deeper. According to the Democrat-led committee investigating Iran-Contra, quote, "Government officials must observe the law, even when they disagree with it," end quote. Or when they think that, quote, "Congress is to blame for passing laws that run counter to administration policy," end quote. The case we're dealing with today is that simple. Secretary Mayorkas has put his political preferences above following the law. Honoring our oaths to the Constitution, respecting the framers' intent, and following congressional precedent, including the precedent set by House Democrats, it is therefore our obligation to hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable. Which brings me to today's proceedings. Today is a grave day. We have not approached this day or this process lightly. Secretary Mayorkas' actions have forced our hand. We cannot allow this border crisis to continue. We cannot allow fentanyl to flood across our border or criminals to waltz in undeterred. And we cannot allow a cabinet secretary with no regard for the separation of powers or the rule of law to remain in office. That is why today we present this committee with the articles of impeachment against Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. I want to address some claims that you'll no doubt hear from Democrats today, claims that aren't true and are meant only to distract. You'll hear a lot about resources and Border Patrol agents, and let me be clear, House Republicans have consistently voted to substantially increase funding for CBP above the President's requested amount. President Biden's FY24 budget request, a cut to CBP's border security operations, funding by several $100 million. H.R. 2, the border security bill the House passed last year, funds an increase of roughly 3,000 Border Patrol agents, more than double what the White House wants in its supplemental spending package. Even the Washington Post fact-check team gave Democrats 3 Pinocchios for claiming that Republicans attempted to cut funds from our Border Patrol force. The Washington Post, 3 Pinocchios. The resources didn't change from last administration to Secretary Mayorkas. What has changed, as one federal judge pointed out, is that this secretary has turned enforcement of the law on its head, turning our borders into a giant red carpet. That's from a federal judge, the Judiciary branch, another branch of government that Secretary Mayorkas has disregarded. We have identified the causes of this crisis and made legislative attempts to address them, yet our efforts deserve to go to Senator Schumer's trash can, said one Democrat member of this committee at our last hearing. Until congressional Democrats put enforcing the law above protecting their political interests, this crisis will continue to rage. Under past presidents of both parties, we didn't have a border crisis of this scale, and what challenges we did have were temporary and resolved utilizing the tools currently available and by following the laws written. We gave Secretary Mayorkas 3 opportunities since August, including for these proceedings, to defend his record in person. Each time he delayed and evaded. We even offered to accept written testimony from him in connection with our last hearing. a request he took us up on at 4:48 this morning, 4:48 a.m. this morning. This 11th hour response demonstrates the lack of seriousness with which Secretary Mayorkas views his responsibilities. And of course, I'll repeat again, that part of the reason we are here is because on November 13th, 2023, 201 Democrats, including 13 Democrats sitting here today, voted to refer articles of impeachment to our committee. Every Democrat on the floor that night voted to do so. You don't get to vote for something and then cry foul when it happens. No Democrat has a right to complain about the process without admitting they regret that vote. So today, we will mark up 2 articles of impeachment: willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and breach of public trust. Again, we're here because our oath and duty compel us to be here. The actions and decisions of Secretary Mayorkas have left us with no other option than to proceed with articles of impeachment. To quote Madison once again, perhaps the greatest danger of abuse in the executive power lies in the improper continuance of bad men in office, end quote. We cannot allow this man to remain in office any longer. The time for accountability is now.